Welcome back to the Sodor Study, folks. The series where I deep dive into members of the Thomas cast that I think are in need of some well-deserved appreciation. Whether it's the more minor, obscure characters some don't remember, or the more popular mainstays of the franchise everyone loves, they're here. And there are so many that I'd like to cover in this analytical series. And while there's going to be plenty of characters I won't dedicate individual videos to, they'll likely be covered in depth in either the episode rankings or the movie reviews. But fear not, my friends, this series is not going anywhere, and there are many more installments to come. So today, I thought I'd dive into a character that is much more popular than any I've covered so far, and one that I think is worthy of an in-depth examination. And that's our favorite, not always lovable, but always compelling, Silver A4, Spencer. So for some reason, I have been on a big Spencer kick recently. And I'm not entirely sure why, but honestly, I'm glad I am. Spencer is such a fun, interesting character that has a lot of fans, and I totally see why. Although he's not quite S tier for me, he's still amazing and a top tier TV series original character for sure. So, why analyze him? Well, I personally have always found Spencer to be quite an entertaining, compelling character that has more than meets the eye behind him. Well, almost always. As a kid, I used to always think that Spencer was just some cocky asshole and bully that no one likes, that the Sodor engines will always show up. Nothing more. But as time went on and he continued to appear more and more in the franchise, he began to grow on me, and I've come to always enjoy watching him in all of his elegant shittiness whenever he appears. And over time, well, I think I've come to the realization that maybe I was wrong about him as a kid, and that perhaps there are some complexities and layers to the nature of his character worth uncovering. Plus, I've come to see many people in the fandom feel the same way and have a soft spot for him as well, with many even developing their own headcanons for him, which I love. And of course, in classic Moonlight Rider 24 fashion, as I always enjoy analyzing the side characters in Thomas that I have soft spots for, I've taken the responsibility upon myself to dissect him. Except, this time, I'm taking on a more major side character with a lot of time and appearances across the series under his belt and a lot of fans to back him up. So this will easily be my most comprehensive and intense character analysis yet. So because of all this, I think it's high time that we take a deep dive into Spencer, what makes him tick, his journey and development over the years, his dynamics with the rest of the cast, and potentially uncover the true, complex layers of his character and see what's beneath that massive ego of his, if anything. And because there's so much to talk about with this guy, this video is going to be a lot longer than the average Sodor study, and easily the longest one yet. Personally, I think it's totally warranted and deserved, and I hope you all enjoy it. Also, just as a heads up, guys, YouTube's copyright system sucks and gives me trouble every time I show footage of the Miller era specials, and even blocked the first upload of my Misty Island Rescue review. So from now on, I'm just going to use pictures from them so I don't have to deal with that issue again. Sorry folks, but never fear, for the movie reviews will continue. Now before we dive in, there's a question I want to pose to all of you, and that I hope to potentially answer by the end of this video. The question is Spencer a bad engine? Or even evil? Or is he misunderstood? Is he a more complex character than we think? Or is he no more than the unlikable narcissistic asshole he always comes across as? Well, let's find out. Who is Spencer? So, who is Spencer? Before we dive in, I wanted to briefly go over the basics of Spencer's character, both to familiarize him with newcomers, as well as to just recap and summarize what we already know for longtime fans. So, who is he and why should we care? Spencer is an elegant, sleek, streamlined steam engine. He's privately owned by the Duke and Duchess of Boxford, who he takes everywhere they need to go for business or pleasure. They often visit the island of Sodor, which is where we see him the most in the series. He is an LNER A4 class locomotive built by Sir Nigel Gresley, which were the spiritual successor to Gordon's class, the A3s, and are among the fastest steam locomotives ever built. Spencer is cocky, arrogant, manipulative, self-righteous, and pretentious, thinking himself superior to all Sodor engines, and will often tease and bully them. He first appeared in the Season 7 episode, Gordon and Spencer, where he comes to the island for the first time and impresses all of the engines, except for Gordon, who quickly becomes jealous. However, the engines quickly see his true, egotistical nature and turn on him, and have had a rivalry with him since. Following this, he became an antagonistic side character that we see pop up every now and again in episodes across the rest of the series, even starring in quite a few. He has a strong rivalry with Gordon, who he constantly pokes fun at and tries to get the better of, but is always challenged in return. He is often bested by the wits, good natures, and hard work of the Sodor engines, leaving him to be embarrassed and disdainful. As a result, Spencer is rather cruel and rude to them whenever he visits. However, on a few occasions, Spencer has tried his best to make amends for his mistakes and do right by the Duke and Duchess, who he always aims to please. Despite letting it get to his smokebox, Spencer works hard and does his job well, and is well loved by the Duke and Duchess, and as a result, has a solid reputation. So with the basics of Spencer out of the way, let's begin digging into why I think Spencer is so compelling and, dare I say, complex. 1. Spencer is an egotistical sucker for attention and validation. So the first aspect of Spencer's character I'd like to discuss is that Spencer seeks and even craves validation and attention from authority figures, especially the Duke and Duchess, but also from the likes of Topham and a few others. Spencer obviously has a lot of fans within the Thomas universe, as seen in The Great Race, where at the beginning of the race itself, the contestants are introduced, and Spencer receives a huge round of applause and fanfare when it's his turn, and I just dig that, as there's actually a lot we can interpret from that short moment. Spencer is probably famous due to being an A4, one of the most popular and well-known locomotive classes in the UK, which of course have a huge fan base. Additionally, he may have fame as a result of both his reputation as the Duke and Duchess of Boxer's engine, as well as being a private, elite, and upper-class engine that generally only serves and transports the finest of passengers and individuals, a great honor that very few are able to receive, let alone afford. Either way, it's apparent that he has a decent fan base, and is fairly well known by rail fans, so it just seems to me that Spencer has a reputation that precedes him, both for better and for worse, as although he's well known, shiny, and impressive, he's also an arrogant jerk to other engines due to a superiority complex he has, and might even be rude to passengers and potential fans too if he thinks they're beneath him. But most of the time, Spencer aims to please his fans and passengers, and always strives for maximum performance and perfection in his work with authority figures and upper class passengers. Let's go over them real quick. So the main people he works for are his owners, the Duke and Duchess, right? Well, while we don't quite know how the Duke and Duchess stumbled upon and purchased Spencer, which is actually something that some fans and fan series have speculated on and even created headcanons and backstories for, and is something I find interesting for sure, we can infer that Spencer clearly has a strong bond with them, and at the point we first meet him in the series in Season 7, has been with them for a decent amount of time. He probably looks up to and admires the Duke and Duchess, and sees them as family, maybe even as parental figures, but at the very least more than just his owners or important people he works for, and has a special bond with them, and values and cares for them dearly. I'm not quite sure what kind of situation or life the Duke found him in and adopted him from, for better I'm sure, but it's fun to speculate like I said. But for now in this section I'll just say his Duke and Duchess mean a lot to him, and he'd do anything for them and always aims to please them. While he's far from perfect and has let them down a few times and made silly, selfish mistakes on numerous occasions, he wants to do what's best for them. And although we don't always see him do so on screen, he always wants to make things right and redeem himself to them because they mean so much to him. While they are the main authority figures in his life, they're not the only ones in his life that matter or that are worth discussing. So Sir Topham Hatt is an authority figure he obviously interacts with often, at least whenever he visits Sodor, and despite his indifference to the Sodor engines, he likely holds a lot of respect for him. Topham is a firm, intelligent, honest, and hardworking businessman that comes from a long line of men with a strong, earned reputation and stake in the UK's railway industry, and has worked extremely hard to save and preserve countless steam locomotives and even diesels, and give them a loving home and jobs that fit them, and is a damn good controller and father figure to them. And for that, he's likely earned Spencer's respect. Topham is a force to be reckoned with, and should not be disrespected or trifled with, and Spencer knows this. Topham is usually fair, polite, and professional towards Spencer as he is with all engines, but always tries to be especially kind and welcoming towards visitors, and asks engines to do the same, even for the likes of engines such as Spencer and Diesel, who eventually become mainstays of the series. However, Topham is also aware of how Spencer treats the others, and doesn't give him any special treatment or passes for his bullshit and jackassery towards his engines, but nonetheless gives him a fair chance whenever he visits. On multiple occasions when Spencer is visited, he always strives to make a good impression, and perform well. Perhaps not always for Topham and moreover for his precious Duke and Duchess, but I bet you he does want to please Topham and shows worth to him at least sometimes. If not for his own ego, but also because, as he's inferred, or even stated at some point I can't remember, he wants Topham to see that almost all of his engines are quote-unquote outdated and old, and that he should upgrade to more modern designs and locomotives such as himself. I don't know. I'm pretty sure I've heard him say something like that before, maybe in the series or in fan series, I don't remember, but it sounds about right, doesn't it? Maybe that's part of the reason he looks down on the Sodor engines, because most of them are older steam engines of designs that came before him, so he views them as out of date and would likely respect them more if they were more modern and similar to him. But even by Season 7 and especially later CGI seasons, he himself has become pretty outdated, even by Sodor standards with the more modern diesels that have arrived and found Sodor as their home. But especially on the mainland where most mainline engines are diesels and electrics, so it's like, really? You should basically be a Sodor engine yourself, Spencer, but I guess because he's an A4 he's above that and is more prestigious than the Sudrians, who are even famous in their own right. Sure, whatever, Spencer. Anywho, basically Topham doesn't tolerate his bullshit and isn't afraid to scold him if necessary, even in front of his owners, who typically agree with him on whatever the inciting incident may be. But does appreciate Spencer as the engine belonging to his close friends, the Duke and Duchess of Boxford, and therefore he does value and somewhat respect him in my opinion. Now lastly, there's the Earl of Sodor, Sir Robert Normanby, introduced in King of the Railway. Now the Earl doesn't own Spencer or anything, but he does borrow him or something along those lines from time to time, as we observe in King of the Railway, and must be familiar or even friends with the Duke and Duchess. In King of the Railway, we observe Spencer return to Sodor to work for the Earl for a little while in his effort to restore Ulfstead Castle, and although he engages in his typical shenanigans with the Sodor engines, especially Gordon, who he challenges to race a few times, and we'll get to that aspect of the film in a bit, and sometimes feels embarrassed about having to pull goods trains. For some reason, I mean, you did it for the Duke and Duchess, why is it such a big deal here? He does his work well and aims to please the Earl, and the Earl seems to be satisfied with his work. While we don't see much more of this dynamic, I still thought it was worth mentioning. But there's one more minor figure I'd like to mention, and that's the Deputy Minister from one of the Brenner era's best episodes, Spencer's VIP. Now, I absolutely love this episode for numerous reasons, and while I'll explain why in depth when we get into the Season 18 ranking one day, I'll briefly discuss what makes it important and worth analyzing for both Spencer's arc and character, and why it works so well. So Spencer is given the task of giving a ride to a deputy minister from the mainland, who's visiting Sodor to give Topham a recognition award for all of his services to transport. We even see Gordon scoff and become highly disappointed upon hearing Spencer is bringing him after volunteering to do so himself. Anywho, Spencer brings the minister to Sodor, but because he decides to show off in typical Spencer fashion, he ignores the signal and speeds past Edward and is sent down the wrong line, to the clay pits, delaying him significantly, much to his embarrassment and the minister's frustration. They eventually get to Knapford, where Topham awaits eagerly, but is disappointed when the deputy minister expresses his frustration with the experience on the railway thus far, and declares he won't be returning to the mainland on Spencer. Following this, Gordon volunteers to do the job of returning the minister later, but Topham states that he'll decide who gets the job of taking the minister home, exciting all of the engines, who quickly become eager to be given the honor. A bit too eager. All of the engines begin showing off and making silly mistakes in their effort to impress Topham and the deputy minister, and be granted the job, but all end up failing spectacularly in entertaining fashion, while Spencer begins to regret showing off. In the end, Topham claims that none of the engines deserve to take the deputy home, but before the minister decides to depart, Spencer offers to take him home and pleads for a second chance, promising that he's learned from his mistakes. The minister generously accepts his offer and reassures Topham and the engines that everyone deserves a second chance. He's willing to give them one, and that he'll return the next day to see Topham and his engines working their hardest and at their best. And sure enough, the minister returns and is pleased to see the railway at its finest, and happily presents the award to Topham, much to the engine's delight. Overall, I honestly think this episode is extremely strong and enjoyable, and actually really interesting, showing us a lot about both Spencer and the other engines. Spencer, as I've already claimed, aims to please authority figures and upper-class passengers, so much to the point that he often shows off and makes stupid mistakes, which he usually pays for. But in the case of this story, he's able to redeem himself thanks to the generosity and kindness of the minister, who grants him and Sodor a second chance to show him how truly special and useful they really are after being left with a bad taste in his mouth on his initial visit. In fact, I think it's also worth noting that the Sodor engines make the same mistake as Spencer, desperately trying to impress the minister only to mess up and fail collectively. But just like Spencer, they make up for it and redeem themselves in the end. In a way, it shows that in some situations, the Sodor engines can be no better than Spencer. But at the same time, Spencer isn't so different from them, in that he too wants to do his work as best he can, and make his superiors proud, and will always try to make things right in the end. I'll admit, most Sodor engines are more compassionate, good-willed, and genuine than Spencer, but they're not perfect either, and quite a few of them aren't above letting their ego get the better of them, and make silly, embarrassing mistakes at times themselves. All that is to say, Spencer and the Sodor engines may be more alike than they all think, and although there are still a few key differences between him and them, I think that it's safe to say that even if Sodor's most stubborn, arrogant engines can still be good at heart and strive their best to be their best selves and often succeed, maybe Spencer can too. 2. Spencer has compelling, strong dynamics with classic characters that challenge both them and himself. So Spencer is a strong, captivating character not just because of his personality, but also because of the interesting and entertaining character dynamics with the mainstays of the series that the writers have crafted for him. which only portray and strengthen both his depth and character, but also all of those he's paired with. So let's dive in. Spencer doesn't visibly have any relationship to his siblings, at least not as far as we can observe in the show, so if going just by the show, Gordon is, in a way, the only family and one of the few friends, or if even that, moreover, frenemies he has. But because of the history of their designs and basis, both being built by Gresley and Spencer's design the A4 being the successor to the A3, or A0 in Gordon's case or whatever, they have a rivalry, and Spencer feels superior and often enjoys teasing him. But deep down, perhaps he does come to care about Gordon, and wants to be his friend, but doesn't know how to show it. In his first episode, Gordon and Spencer, we see Gordon come face to face with an engine that's actually faster and even stronger than him, and is, in many ways, his superior in regards to design, with everyone being enamored and in awe upon meeting him, and as a result is left feeling extremely insecure and vulnerable, which is something we don't often see from Gordon, at least not in this way. Spencer is of course tasked with taking the Duke and Duchess around Sodor and to a party dedicated to their arrival, but as Gordon's hill is on the way, Gordon advises that he'll need to take on extra water, but Spencer of course ignores him. After this, we're able to see Spencer in action as he races across Sodor, and he's an excellent sight to see, but ends up running out of water on the hill as he was warned. Gordon is sent to lend him a helping buffer to finish the journey, which delights him. Gordon of course teases Spencer a little bit, who retorts and snaps at him, but Gordon doesn't care. Gordon helps Spencer for the rest of the way to the party, much to Spencer's embarrassment. The episode ends with the engines agreeing that Spencer isn't as great as they first thought, and is actually a pretentious ass, and Gordon is praised by Topham, who claims he's still Sodor's fastest engine, leaving Gordon with the biggest grin on his face. This is easily one of the best of Season 7, and an S tier one for sure, as it introduces Spencer in a very effective way in my opinion. We see him get paired with a classic character, Gordon, who's just the perfect choice for multiple reasons, and that he challenges Gordon as a character, and his confidence, and works as a great rival that will be around till the end of the series, or at least the end of the good seasons of the series. It shows us a lot about Gordon's character, as although he feels insecure and dare I say threatened by Spencer, he still wants the best for the railway and decides to help him. And although it's pretty much just to show him up, it still counts for something, and I really like that. So there's another major appearance of Gordon Spencer's rivalry in the series that I think is worth discussing, and that's in King of the Railway. Now, I briefly mentioned this movie earlier when talking about Spencer's relationship with the Earl, and while that part is relevant too, it's very clear that Spencer and Gordon's interactions and scenes from it, and the mini-arc they have, are the more major, important aspect of the film worth discussing here. In the film, as previously mentioned, Sir Robert Normanby, the Earl, returns to Sodor to restore Ulfstead Castle, and many of the engines are tasked with helping in the effort, both Sudrians and visitors, with Spencer being among them. Spencer is even the one to bring the Earl to Sodor from the mainland, which is cool. We see Spencer helping the Earl on errands and whatnot, and transport him around the island where needed. During all of this, we get to observe Spencer interacting with the Sodor engines a bit in his typical snotty manner. And of course, naturally and fittingly, we're able to watch Spencer's always entertaining banter with Gordon once again, with their rivalry being more prevalent than ever. Before Spencer even arrives, all the engines are at the washdown and are curious as to why, and Emily states that Spencer is visiting, and Gordon immediately expresses his disdain for him and angrily complains that they better not be getting a washdown just for him. Honestly, that's just hilarious and perfectly sums up their dynamic with a short exchange. And Spencer isn't even there. But of course, they're all getting washed down for the Earl's arrival party, which Spencer brings the Earl to. Later, Spencer arrives at Tidmouth to spend the night on the island as to be ready to help the Earl for a few weeks. Spencer and Gordon of course start teasing and mocking one another instantly about anything and everything, especially regarding who's the fastest, until Percy innocently suggests that they have a race to decide who's the fastest once and for all, which the two gladly agree to. The next day, Gordon is waiting at Knapford with his coaches until Spencer slithers in and passes him, challenging him to a race, and gets a head start much to Gordon's dismay. The two race down the line for a while, and Gordon almost catches up, but before he can, Spencer swerves off onto the track to the estate and teases Gordon once again, stating that he's off to be really useful, and they'll have to have a proper race another time. What a dick! Classic Spencer, challenging others to races and contests with an unfair advantage in his favor. Or he just cheats, either or, just shows how eager he is to maintain his ego and image, and will go to unjust lengths to do so, but typically gets shown up and beaten in the end most of the time. But we'll touch on that again in a bit. Anywho, throughout the film, we see the engines tease Spencer a bit here and there, and continue to ignore his bullshit and arrogant comments as usual. And it's fun, and Spencer and Gordon continue their racing whenever they meet, but are never able to finish and properly resolve their rivalry. However, during one of the races, the two are suddenly passed at near top speed by some of the fastest engines they've ever seen, much to their shock, and upon meeting the two are left gobsmacked. The two engines they encounter are, of course, Connor and Caitlin, two streamliners from the mainland, tasked with bringing visitors from the mainland to see the castle once it opens and are currently on a time trial. The two politely introduce themselves and invite them to join in on their race, but Spencer and Gordon uncharacteristically quickly jump to decline their offer, mumbling various excuses and reasons as to why, complaining they're too busy to race and that they never race. Too busy to race. Bullshit! You just did! And for the first time and probably ever, both Spencer and Gordon feel threatened by the visitors, and it's very compelling to see. For the first time, they both come face to face with steam engines, or any engines to be honest, that are faster than them, and they're left feeling extremely insecure, anxious, and unsure of themselves. And honestly, I don't blame them. As far as we can see in the actual series, neither of them have met any engines faster or stronger than them, at least steam engines. As by the end of the show's timeline, I'm sure there's already plenty of diesels built and in service that are stronger and faster than both of them, but still the point stands. They're threatened in a way we haven't seen before, and are both left feeling vulnerable, and I really like that. They're both outdated by this point in the show, and although Connor and Caitlin's bases are roughly the same age as them, if not older, they still feel quite intimidated by the bigger, streamlined locomotives that race about and can reach top speed easily. Perhaps more easily than either of them. As a result, they feel insecure and must accept that they're not going to be fastest and best forever, and by the end of the film, they realize and accept that, in my opinion. At the end of the movie, Ulfstead Castle is officially reopened to the public, and in the spirit of celebrating, the Earl hosts a race between Connor and Caitlin, who once again invite Gordon and Spencer to join, and although they are reluctant at first, Topham agrees that they can have a proper race for this special occasion. The film ends with the four embarking on their epic race across the island. While we unfortunately don't see the rest of it, nor who comes out victorious, it was the spirit and the nature of the event that matters and is significant, in my opinion. Gordon and Spencer were able to choose to race this time, both officially and for fun, without any regulations, caveats, or distractions, and take the opportunity to do so, albeit nervously. However, they quickly perk up and get into the spirit of being competitive as well as lighthearted about it all, just to simply have fun and enjoy it alongside their new fast friends. I just really like this. Spencer and Gordon decide to let go for once and just enjoy themselves, and have fun to not just decide who's fastest and best, but also to just enjoy being with one another and compete for fun as opposed to for ego stroking. Ultimately, they can accept that it doesn't matter in this moment who's the best, strongest, or fastest. What matters is that they can take this opportunity to enjoy themselves for who and what they are, strengths, limits, and all, together. So yeah, King of the Railway serves as an effectively memorable point in Spencer's journey, and the evolution of his dynamic with Gordon that I thought was worth discussing. More on their rivalry as the video continues. So another relationship of Spencer's that I thought was worth analyzing is his weird acquaintanceship or even friendship with Thomas. Yeah. So for brief context, we don't really see Spencer and Thomas directly interact with one another until season 10's Topped Off Thomas. Gee, remember that one? I don't, or at least don't want to. Sure, we see him talk trash about Spencer with the other engines, and always agrees that he's a piece of shit, but never see them really interact one-on-one. In Topped Off Thomas, Thomas is feeling cockier than usual, and stupid as he usually is in the hit era, unfortunately, and upon meeting Spencer at a junction, who's on his way to pick up Topham and the Duke and Duchess, is disappointed that he wasn't given the job. Spencer mocks him and claims little engines like him don't get the important jobs, pissing Thomas off majorly. Thomas, being a complete moron, retorts and challenges Spencer to a race to the next station. At Kelsthorpe Station, Topham and the Duke and Duchess await, but upon arriving too quickly, Spencer screeches to a stop at the last minute, but Thomas comes flying in, causing Topham's hat to get blown off and taken by the wind. This, of course, gets Thomas in trouble with Topham, who for some reason thinks he'll be able to find and catch his hat, and sends Thomas off on a fool's errand to do so. To sum this stupid-ass episode up, Thomas gets into shenanigans trying to find it, but ultimately is able to catch it and bring it back, pleasing Topham. And that's pretty much it for that one. It's not super interesting or anything, and it's probably one of the worst episodes of that era, and maybe the whole show. F tier for sure, but I do like seeing Thomas interact with Spencer directly, and how they immediately bump heads and get on each other's nerves and attempt to bruise one another's egos. Spencer bullies Thomas as soon as they meet, in classic Spencer fashion, picking on a smaller engine, but any Sodor engine will do for that matter in his mind. And Thomas, being the defensive, stubborn engine he is, takes none of it and defends himself, but bites off more than he can chew and gets into trouble. And we will see this dilemma, mistake, and scenario once again on a much larger scale down the line, and we'll analyze it when we get there. But there's actually one more Thomas and Spencer episode I'd like to talk about, and that's Season 11's Dream On. Now, Dream On is honestly one I have a soft spot for. In this one, Spencer once again returns to the island with the Duke and Duchess to visit, much to the dismay of the other engines. One day, Thomas is reluctantly tasked with helping Spencer in the yard when he arrives on the island after a long journey. Spencer tries bossing Thomas around, but Thomas stands his ground. Spencer then asserts his dominance and claims superiority over him, stating that he's better than Thomas in every way, angering Thomas greatly. Thomas still helps him and later returns to the shed where Spencer is resting as well. Spencer claims anyone can shunt trucks, but that it takes a special engine to be granted the privilege of transporting and working with the Duke and Duchess of Boxford. Thomas, determined to prove Spencer wrong, tries to do everything he can to improve himself and match, if not surpass, Spencer in every way possible, specifically in speed, looks, and strength. Of course, the story unfortunately uses the 3 strikes formula, where in each instance Thomas tries his hardest to be better than Spencer, he fails and makes a fool of himself. Let's be real, there's no way Thomas could ever beat Spencer in speed or strength due to his small size, but that doesn't make him any less special, valuable, or important than him, which Thomas ends up learning over the course of the story. After making his 3 mistakes, Thomas happily returns to shunting trucks the next day, but is informed by Topham that the Duke has an emergency and must return to the mainland as soon as possible. Thomas gladly agrees to help bring the coaches to Spencer and Topham thanks him, but upon bringing them to him, Spencer is not ready and is having some sort of mechanical issue. Thomas teases him a little bit until the Duke arrives and upon seeing Spencer is unable to take him, asks Thomas to take him to the airport, which Thomas obliges and feels honored to do. The Duke's special crest is placed on Thomas, and they set off. Thomas feels grander than ever and proud to have received such a privilege, and takes the Duke to the airport. The Duke and Duchess thank Thomas and leave for the mainland. In the end, Thomas realizes his value, and that he is just as special as Spencer just by being himself. What I really like about this episode is that although it follows the 3 strikes formula, it feels a bit more unique and genuine than most episodes, in that each mistake he makes is different, and forces him to realize he isn't superior to Spencer in that specific way. Ultimately, Thomas realizes and comes to accept that he may not match or be superior to Spencer in the ways he wishes, but he is still capable of proving himself and demonstrating his usefulness and value by helping the Duke and Duchess and is equal to Spencer in quality, importance, value, and many more ways. I just love the message a lot, that being himself is the best way to be, proving Spencer wrong in his own way. Now, many have argued that this moral is reused and just copied into the special The Great Race, which is honestly mostly true, but I've always enjoyed that movie for what it is and think the moral and general concept was done much better and more effectively there. And I'll tell you why when we get to it in my review series of the specials. Anywho, the point is, we basically get to see more of Spencer's dynamic with Thomas, and it's done well. I think it's fun seeing Spencer get paired with our lovable main character, someone that can't match her best in physically, but instead in character. Thomas can be stubborn, selfish, and naive at times, but he's good-hearted and compassionate, and will do anything for his friends, which is more than can be said for Spencer. Thomas once again proves himself to be one of the best engines around, which we already knew him to be of course, and shows Spencer up in a very satisfying way by having the privilege of taking the Duke on an important trip, demonstrating that any engine can be worthy of such an honor, and I just love that. I think for now, at this point in the series, Spencer realizes that Sodor engines shouldn't be messed with, as they have shown him up time and time again, so he leaves for a while, but will have a very cinematic return soon. We'll see this arc continue and watch the 2 butt heads and challenge one another very soon, and we'll dive into that further in a later section. Lastly, Spencer also seemingly has no respect for older engines such as Edward and even Steven, one of the first steam engines ever built. Geez, Spencer, you disrespectful shit. As we see in Edward the Great, Spencer arrives to Sodor to take the Duke and Duchess to their new summer house, and disrespects Edward alongside the rest of the Sodor engines in typical Spencer fashion. He's challenged to a race by the other engines, only for Edward to be given the task to deliver the Duke's furniture, much to everyone's disappointment and embarrassment. But Edward being the badass he is, and thanks to Spencer's idiocy and arrogance, Edward manages to beat him in the race, embarrassing Spencer greatly and making all of his friends proud. A great episode in an era with lots of highs and lows, but I think it was a great choice for the writers to bring Spencer back and put him in a tortoise in the hare-esque scenario, where he's paired up with a more likable, older, and physically slower underdog character that ends up beating and showing him up due to his ego. It would have been easy to just pair him with Gordon and have the race be between them, and as entertaining as that would have been, and we kind of see it later on numerous occasions, which we'll get to, I think this was the more, yes, perhaps cliche story and choice. I think it was fun and entertaining nonetheless as we see Edward prove himself once again to the other engines, specifically Gordon and James, and show up Spencer, a character we've only come to dislike so far, and continues to portray him as pretty antagonistic with not too much depth yet. But this is only the beginning of his journey, so bear with me, we're far from done folks, so don't make up your mind just yet. So I will say, it's obvious that Spencer doesn't have a heart of gold or anything, But deep down, I think he does want to be really useful and typically do the right thing and be the best engine he can be. However, that does not stop him from being selfish and doing things out of mere self-interest, sometimes even very shitty things, the most major of which we'll discuss in a moment. But this, as well as everything we've learned so far, does lead to a more personal dilemma and leads me to ask a critical, quintessential question. And that brings us to our third and final section. 3. Is Spencer a bad engine? Or even evil? So, this is something I've seen come up a good bit. The question of if Spencer is genuinely a bad engine, is he evil? Or is he misunderstood and more complex than that? This is the question I posed at the beginning of the video, and I'm going to do my best to attempt to answer it based on everything we've already covered, as well as his final key appearances and character development we have yet to cover. So without further ado, let's dive in. First, I'd briefly like to mention that both of Spencer's voices are very fitting and strong in my opinion. His UK voice, by Matt Wilkinson, feels more sly, conniving, and snake-like, while his US voice, Glenn Raj, feels very grand, booming, and intimidating. Both are very effective in conveying the numerous layers inside to his character in my opinion. Alright, so here's where I'm going to cover Spencer's most major and important appearance in my opinion. Hero of the Rails. Now, as many of you have likely seen or know, I've analyzed this movie in depth on my channel already, so I'll try not to ramble about it for too long. However, I think it's a critical part of Spencer's journey as a character, so I believe it's completely necessary that we revisit it and once again dive deep. But this time, focus specifically on why it's so important to Spencer's character and what it all means in the grand scheme of things. So let's do it. The movie begins with Spencer's abrupt return to Sodor after being gone for a while, scaring all the engines as he flies past them. At Knapford, upon the engines realizing it's him, Spencer declares he's back and staying for the whole summer to help build the new summer house for the Duke and Duchess, much to the shock and horror of the engines. Following this, Spencer begins harassing and bullying the other engines as he goes about his work, leaving them all extremely annoyed and angry. One day, the engines encounter Spencer at the docks, where he begins mocking them loudly, picking on Thomas in particular. He calls him a tiny toy tank engine, and that he's unable to pull heavy loads, and that he'd never be good enough to be the Duke and Duchess's engine. This is the last straw for Thomas and his friends, as Thomas snaps back that he can pull equally heavy loads, with Percy declaring he can pull even heavier. Even the big engines jump to Thomas's defense, and are all highly offended by Spencer's comments, especially the ones directed at Thomas. Spencer is unimpressed and doesn't scare easily, so he challenges Thomas to a contest of strength to prove who's the superior engine and smugly leaves the docks. Thomas realizes that he, once again, like I stated he did earlier, has bitten off more than he can chew, and let his mouth get the better of him. Thomas wants to ultimately prove Spencer wrong about both him and his friends, once and for all, by showing him up in front of everyone. And while that's honorable, it's also naive of him to think that he can take him on like that, as he knows he couldn't match him in Dream On. But thanks to encouragement from his friends, he decides to take on the challenge, and meets Spencer for the race the next morning. The contest begins, and Thomas and Spencer race across the island, as Thomas is more determined and strong-willed than ever, while Spencer remains confident and unwavering in his ability to best the Sodor engines, especially little Thomas. As we all know, the story goes, Thomas tries his best, but his brakes fail and he ends up on an old, abandoned part of the line. There he finds an old, dilapidated engine that we come to know as Hero, a kind and wise engine from Sodor's glory days. Thomas promises to help restore him to his former glory, but opts to not tell Topham, fearing that he might scrap Hero if he finds out. For a little while, Thomas tries his best to help Hero and keep him safe by bringing him spare parts to fix him up, and holds his secret close to his chest. However, as Thomas continues to do so, Spencer observes Thomas puffing close to the summer house, which unfortunately happens to be close to Hero's hiding spot, so Thomas makes sure to take extreme caution and care moving forward. As Thomas begins to share his secret with more and more of his friends, and ultimately brings them on to help him in his crusade, Spencer becomes increasingly suspicious and begins snooping around in an effort to discover Thomas's secret and bring him down. However, Percy ends up losing some mail vans while trying to help Thomas, and the two spend a few days searching for them whilst trying to help Hero. During all of this, Spencer continues investigating and interrogates and harasses the other engines, but they have none of it and stand their ground. He continues to do so until he's put out of action due to an accident at the quarry. The engines take advantage of this opportunity to help Hero as much as possible, until he is near completion. However, after being repaired, Spencer ends up discovering the mail vans, but thanks to some quick thinking, is chased away from Hero's hideout, and the engines frame him for stealing Percy's vans, getting him in trouble with Topham, but he vows to have his revenge. Soon after, while Thomas and Hero await the final part, Spencer stumbles upon their hiding place, horrifying the two and pressuring them into running away and trying to get as far away as possible. This would be their biggest mistake that they pay for dearly. As they race down the line and begin to feel triumphant, they are caught by Spencer, who gives chase. The scene is exhilarating and nerve-wracking, as although they try their hardest to escape, because Hero was not quite finished, everything quite literally falls apart as Hero begins to break down and parts come flying off, much to Thomas's horror and Spencer's initial shock but then devilish delight. I mean, come on, look at that devious ass grin right there. Just so cruel. As the chase comes to an end and Hero loses all opportunity to puff on his own, Spencer deviously mocks Thomas's effort, and in his cruelty, declares that Hero will be scrapped if he has anything to say about it, and will tell Topham immediately. Just when all hope appears to be lost and Thomas begins to give up, Gordon comes to the rescue, challenging Spencer to a race and mocking him loudly, which of course gets him into Spencer's head and taps into his ego, so Spencer races off to catch him. Thomas decides to not give up, and hides Hero once again. After Gordon beats him in a race, he comes face to face with his authority figures that mean more to him than anyone else, the Duke and Duchess of Boxford. The Duke scolds him for his stupidity and antics. Spencer, taken aback, defends himself and rambles in jumbled sentences about Hero and Thomas, but sounding deluded, he's stopped in his tracks by the Duke and gets told off, with the Duke stating that he'll be sent back to the mainland and is unfit to work. And once again, being the smart, sly dog he is, Thomas arrives at just the right moment to offer his help with finishing the summer house, with the Duke agreeing and even asks him to keep an eye on Spencer, as he's clearly not feeling well, much to Spencer's embarrassment, and serves as a huge blow to his pride and ego. Spencer and Thomas work to finish the summer house together, with Thomas keeping a close eye on him as promised, and he ultimately decides to tell Topham about Hero. One day, Thomas and Spencer are almost finished with the summer house, and Thomas finally leaves to tell Topham, with Spencer realizing his plan once again gives chase for the second and final time. I praised this scene in the Hero of the Rails video, and I'm going to praise it again here. A really great scene for sure. It's epic, tense, and exhilarating, and serves as a strong climax for our protagonist and antagonist. Of course, there's no way Thomas would ever beat Spencer in a race, but like I justified in my video, I think the only reason he did is because they both probably went the speed limit, or just over it, so they're almost going the same speed. But Spencer still managed to get close and almost stop him. But as karma for his cruel acts, Spencer has bad luck, and the bridge on the marshland collapses underneath him as they race across, granting Thomas the opportunity to get free and tell Topham everything. Thomas even feels bad about the crash, and promises he'll bring help to Spencer later. Thomas tells Topham everything, who of course is very understanding, kind, and promises to restore Hero, with the Duke and Duchess, who are present as well, assuring that Spencer will be disciplined and left in the marshland for the time being as punishment. Hero is restored to his former glory, and Thomas returns to rescue Spencer as promised, bringing Hero with him to complete the task. I talked about how this kind of serves as a metaphor for Spencer's character arc in my Hero of the Rails video, so I'll basically sum it up real quick here. Basically, Spencer is too far gone as an antagonist that Thomas can't redeem and save on his own, so he needs Hero, his new friend, to help him do so. And it's really sweet in that the engine Spencer wanted to destroy out of spite for Thomas and his friends decides to help him anyway, and helps give Spencer the second chance he may not have deserved, but needed. So Spencer is fixed and the three engines finish the summer house together. In the end, Spencer apologizes to both of them and calls them fine engines and fine friends. And although they don't say it, I can infer that they forgive him for his cruelty and selfishness and try to move forward as friends. And then, as we all remember, the film closes with Hero going home in a beautiful scene. Now, while I think this movie has its flaws, Spencer is not one of them, and is part of why it's great. Let's discuss. So, the way I see it, this film has three main characters: Thomas, Hero, and Spencer. Thomas serves as our protagonist who's on a mission to help his new friend. Hero serves as the main new face and the mentor to Thomas in need of assistance and protection, and Spencer serves as the antagonist who is hell-bent on one-upping Thomas and showing the Sodor engines his wrath in any way he can. Thomas was so determined and desperate to help Hero, and it's admirable and a joy to watch, as he and his closest friends come together to restore their new friend, and serves as a great main character. On the other hand, Spencer serves as an excellent antagonist, as he continues on a vengeful path to uncover Thomas and his friends' secret and destroy it, and take away the thing they love and are so passionate about. Or in this case, an engine in need of their help. We see how much Spencer clearly despises the Sodor engines, desiring revenge for all the times they've shown him up, on a desperate mission to hurt them in a far more personal way than ever before. He's got beef with Gordon most of all, but also Thomas, both of whom have shown him up and proven themselves, so his disdain is most present around them. But he shows how much he despises the rest of the Sodor engines too, and therefore wants revenge on all of them, but I'd say Gordon and Thomas especially. Gordon because of their rivalry as Gresley locomotives and their unending contest of determining who's the faster and superior engine, and Thomas because he doesn't tolerate his bullshit and isn't afraid of standing up to him in front of everyone, so he wants to make him pay for it dearly. This feels so personal, and for everyone, especially Spencer, it really is, and I just love it. To some fans, it may feel like a tad too far and an unnatural development in Spencer's journey and arc, and while I honestly kinda get it, I think it works very well and effectively. It feels like a solid progression of his character. He doesn't care about Hero, the life of an innocent, older engine. He sees himself as superior to both him and all Sodor engines, and wants to have revenge on all of them, as a family. So why should he care about some nobody scrap engine? Why shouldn't he be scrapped? I know that sounds so harsh and cruel, but that's just my interpretation of Spencer's thought process here. Because in his mind, it's the best way to get back at them, by breaking their hearts. He'll do anything to have payback and retribution, even if that means destroying something or someone they love. And that's so mind-blowing and unthinkable to me. Is it even evil? However, as we discussed, Spencer's shown up and stood up to multiple times throughout the film, and gets his comeuppance in the end, and is beaten by our main protagonist, and it's very satisfying. But the most important takeaway from this film is, in my opinion, Spencer does have redemption. You can clearly see just based on his face alone how guilty and shitty Spencer feels for what he's done while finishing the summer house with Hero and Thomas. And even how visibly genuine and sincere he is, or is trying to be, when he apologizes to the two at the end. He wants to make amends. He does feel bad, and knows what he did was wrong and horrible. Cruel even. He let his disdain, spite, and hatred get the better of him, and it nearly turned him into a monster. But thankfully, he was stopped, and his plan thwarted, leaving him with his thoughts and reflect on his actions as he awaited rescue. And in the end, his comeuppance paid off, and the consequences of it resonated with him, and he's come to see the error of his ways, feeling much remorse and regret for his selfishness and cruelty. Following this, Spencer does still brag and tease the Sodor engines sometimes, but is never, ever as cruel, inconsiderate, and maniacal as he was here to them again. Spencer wanted to be friends with Hero and Thomas in the end, and wanted redemption, not because he was asked to, but because he knew it was right in his heart. In my opinion, following this, he tries to be better and follow up on his growth here, and continue progressing into a more mature and considerate engine. I absolutely love his arc here. It's so strong, effective, and emotionally resonant. It doesn't feel forced or unnecessary or unearned. It feels natural, genuine, and above all, real. You believe that Spencer is sorry. You believe that he wants to do better. You believe that he's going to be a better engine and does give a shit. But above all else, you believe that he is not, in fact, a monster. But that's not all. As following this film, Spencer has numerous very strong, well-executed appearances and main roles in episodes over the years that continue his redemptive arc. In Spencer's VIP, which I discussed earlier, we see Spencer show off and make a stupid mistake, but in the end he apologizes with sincerity and asks for forgiveness and a second chance, and is given to him. It shows how much Spencer does care about his work and image, and even the Sodor engines in a way, as he not only asks for his redemption, but also theirs if you ask me, when he pleads for a second chance. But most importantly, it shows that Spencer can and does learn from his mistakes. He'll likely always be cocky, arrogant, and quite a show-off, but Spencer gives more of a shit than people think and does want to be a better engine. He just doesn't always know how. But damn it, he'll always try to make up for his mistakes and do better. And even though he sometimes makes similar mistakes in episodes, which is either somewhat the writer's fault or is an intentional aspect of his character, he consistently tries to make amends and correct his mistakes and achieve redemption. In Two Wheels Good, another very strong episode in my opinion, we see Spencer give the Duke and Duchess a ride to Callan Castle, but unfortunately breaks down and is unable to continue, until Thomas comes along and agrees to help him out and give them a ride. Until Thomas breaks down and then Bertie takes them. Until Bertie gets a flat tire and they have to call for help and get to the castle on Harold. Man, I love this episode. It's so funny and ridiculous. Easily one of the best uses of the Three Strikes formula. It's not super complex or teaches us anything interesting about any of the characters really, but the point is that it does continue to show that although Spencer still brags a lot and talks the talk, he isn't above getting help, and at this point in his journey, will be courteous and polite to others when they help him out, and won't forget that. Even in season 15, one of the worst seasons of the whole show, we see Spencer get an interesting, redemptive story. In Spencer the Grand, we see him try to find his way home in some heavy fog despite being told to stay at Tidmouth, but cockily believes he can find his own way home, but of course fails to do so and gets lost multiple times until he ends up back at Tidmouth, embarrassed and feeling sorry for himself. Thomas offers him a spot in Tidmouth once again, And Spencer says something interesting. "I don't deserve your kindness, Thomas." And upon realizing Percy is missing, Nobly decides to go out and search for him. And after giving it his best shot, Spencer is able to find Percy and bring him home. The Engines are extremely grateful to Spencer for helping bring home a member of their family and invite him to stay with them. And for once, Spencer is grateful and gladly accepts. Wow, this was honestly really, really sweet. The Three Strikes formula sucks. This episode isn't phenomenal or anything, but it's got some great stuff and a few interesting takeaways in my opinion. Maybe, in a way, over time, Spencer's come to accept and perhaps even care about the Sodor Engines as his peers. Friends even. And might even call Sodor his second home. And deep down, would enjoy being part of their family. However, he won't admit it, or let himself. At least for most of the series, because of his ego and lack of ability to properly express himself and his care for them, as well as, potentially, his deeply rooted insecurity that he's not good enough to be part of their family. And he said it himself, maybe he doesn't even deserve to. Wow, that's deep. He is kind to them from time to time, as I've mentioned, and has shown he doesn't completely despise or hate them, he just has a strange, on-off, love-hate friendship with them, especially Gordon and Thomas. One thing I'd also like to briefly mention is that Spencer held the world speed record for steam locomotives for a decent amount of time. But as we see in the Great Race, he enters the competition and is met with a few formidable opponents. Notably the Flying Scotsman, a streamlined Gordon, another streamlined engine, and most importantly, an electric engine, Etienne. The race is epic and exhilarating, and although Spencer leads the pack for most of it, as it turns out, we all probably knew this would happen realistically. Etienne beats Spencer with ease in the final stretch, setting a new rail speed world record in the process, much to Spencer's dismay. I can only imagine the aftermath of this moment, as I'm sure Spencer was left distraught and defeated, but would somehow manage to get his groove and confidence back. I do wish we saw an episode or maybe even just a short moment about this in the series just to acknowledge it, but I digress. Just thought it was worth mentioning. Lastly, Spencer's final main role and appearance in the series as far as the wiki says, Confused Coaches, manages to give Spencer and his dynamic with Gordon a proper send-off and real closure, and actually does it very, very well. In this one, Spencer returns with the Duke and Duchess for New Year's Eve, and upon encountering Gordon on the main line, immediately starts teasing and mocking him. Having none of it, Gordon retorts and starts racing him, and just as they match speed and are on the verge of crashing out, Gordon is forced to stop at a station, ending their race abruptly, much to Spencer's delight. The next day, Gordon and Spencer continue bantering and arguing with one another over stupid shit and even get really petty about numbers, with Gordon claiming that the most important engines leave from Platform 1 and mocks Spencer's lack of a number. It's pretty funny if I'm being honest, but very petty. The next day, before taking the Duke, Duchess, Topham, and other important people to an event at Callan Castle, Spencer decides to get his petty revenge by waiting at Platform 1, taking Gordon's usual spot. This of course gets Gordon riled up, and in the midst of their arguing, the two accidentally get confused by the shunters, and are given the wrong coaches. They end up taking off abruptly without a care and race each other in their immature way, engaging in mockery and petty arguments along the way, only to realize at Gordon's first stop that they're both taking the wrong train. So everyone meets up at the castle, the two point the blame at one another but get rightfully scolded for their antics and apologize to Topham, the Duke, and Duchess. The two make things right and take all the passengers to their proper destinations and later return to Knapford. Topham suggests that they apologize and make up in the spirit of the new year to have a fresh start. The two both give sincere, genuine, and heartfelt apologies that I firmly believe they both said with their chests. Gordon even admits there's no real difference between Platforms 1 and 2, and that he was simply being arrogant. The episode ends on an uplifting note as the characters all wish one another a happy new year. This episode is honestly just very sweet and very well written. Their strong, rivalry-based dynamic is on display one last time, and it's done so well and concludes on a high note. After years and years of bitterness, pettiness, rivalry, competitiveness, and so much disdain and spite, Gordon and Spencer have seemingly, finally, buried the hatchet and forgiven one another, and are trying to move on. Who knows? They just might even become friends. This is probably too deep of an interpretation, but I see Gordon's comment about there not being a difference between the platforms as being kind of symbolic of how he's realized that he and Spencer aren't so different after all, and are, well, truthfully, the same in quality and significance. Gordon may be more mature and maybe even more emotionally intelligent, but Spencer is as equally dedicated and hardworking, and the two will both always do any and everything they can to right their wrongs and redeem themselves of their mistakes, and do what's best for those they care for, and for that, they both deserve much credit and appreciation. Overall, their arc is brought to a very satisfying definitive conclusion that I am very happy to say was never undone or ruined by other episodes in the show. As after this, Spencer unfortunately stopped appearing for the most part, and honestly, while I'm sad we didn't see more of him, I think I'm even more glad that we didn't, because that way, his character was never tarnished by the poor writing of the Waba era, and his arc was left untouched, and that was definitely for the best. And that's pretty much it for all of Spencer's appearances and important roles in the series. He had a few other starring and side roles here and there, such as in The Beast of Sodor, where he teases Henry about the abominable snowman, but later gets scared off his wheels and is shown to be a coward, or in Welcome Stafford, where he shows newcomer Stafford around only to fail spectacularly and embarrass himself. But those episodes and any others I skipped over just didn't really warrant much analysis in my opinion, and I feel confident that I covered all of his important, significant appearances and roles that played a genuine role in his development over the years. Conclusion. So, this is it. We've gone through and analyzed all of Spencer's main roles and appearances across the series, at least the most relevant ones, and have examined the most prominent aspects of his character and the depth that lies beneath him. So where does that leave Spencer as a character? Okay, now this is the point of the video where, as promised, I'm going to finally answer the question I posed at the beginning based on everything we've gone through and learned together. So, is Spencer a bad engine, or even an evil one? Well, my friends, the short answer to that is, at least in my opinion, no. Spencer isn't evil. He's not even really a bad engine. Sure, he can be a real arrogant asshole and hard to get along with a good chunk of the time, but he's much more than that. He's hardworking, loyal, intelligent, confident, dedicated, and grand. He's an elegant Gresley A4 class, one of the finest steam locomotives in the world, and is damn proud of it. On top of that, he's the private engine to a fine, wealthy couple, the Duke and Duchess of Boxford, who he loves and cherishes dearly. Spencer is, well, on paper, an extraordinary engine, but deep down, he's lonely, and dare I say, insecure. He doesn't talk about his siblings, if he even has a relationship with them at all, so the only family he really has are the Duke and Duchess of Boxford. But if you count being built by the same designer, Gordon is technically a cousin of his, and therefore could be seen as family. But to Spencer, he's always been a rival, a competitor, and an adversary to best at every opportunity. So, does Spencer really have any friends? Well, depends on who you ask. He has as many fans as an engine could ever want, but friends? If you ask me, Spencer does want to have friends, but just doesn't know how to express that or make them, and acts incapable of setting his ego aside to be kind and courteous enough to do so. Maybe he was never taught. When he first arrived on Sodor, he made an excellent first impression on all the engines, but almost immediately blew it because of his ego. As a result, the Sodor engines have always seen him as just some narcissistic jerk, and he just sees them as beneath him. But what if he's more than that? What if Spencer's first mistake was what led him down this path, and it's just been too hard for him to turn back? Like a self-fulfilling prophecy. Maybe he did want to be friends with the Sodor engines. Maybe he still does deep down, but it's just let his ego get in the way of it. Can he be egotistical and selfish? Absolutely. But every time Spencer messes up majorly, he always tries to make up for it and will do anything to redeem himself in the end, whether it's to authority figures and people or fellow engines. What if the engines of Sodor have never really given him that second chance that he needs to be better, to redeem himself to them, perhaps even become their friend? And that's why he's held the same attitude all this time, and may never change his ways. Spencer's not evil, perhaps cruel, but more than anything, he's cynical, harsh, and perhaps even, well, broken. Maybe he's never been through a severely traumatic event or anything that made him this way, but maybe he's just become so bitter, cold, and potentially broken because he's always felt so alone and was never taught to be kind, humble, and considerate, and wasn't given the proper love, attention, and home he needed until later in life with the Duke and Duchess. And by then, well, maybe it's too hard for him to change. But is Spencer too far gone, too broken, too irredeemable to be better? In my opinion, absolutely not. Anyone can change and come back from the darkest parts of life. And that includes Spencer, as he's clearly shown that he can make up for his mistakes, and can be considerate, and does care, and does want to be good, and does want to have friends, a family, and to be loved and cared for. He'll always have a loving home with the Duke and Duchess, but maybe he could have another in his friends on Sodor. The engines of Sodor, in spite of their flaws, are good engines, and are a forgiving, kind, and welcoming crowd. So if they saw Spencer for who he really was, maybe they would give him another chance. And maybe, just maybe, if he would just change his ways and open his mind to it, maybe they will accept him as one of their own, and he'll get the happy ending he might not always deserve, but needs. But as the show ended, we'll never know if that would have happened. But I like to be optimistic. And that is why Spencer is a complex, misunderstood, and great character. Now, of course, this is just all my opinion and interpretation of the character, and you're all, of course, free to have your own interpretations, ideas, and headcanons. And if you disagree with me entirely, that's completely fine. If anything, please share all of your thoughts, headcanons, and opinions on Spencer down below in the comments. Or maybe even make your own video about this guy, because in all honesty, he's so entertaining, layered, and compelling that I don't think my video alone can do him justice, and say all there is to say about this guy. Hell, I know Tug will probably give him a Sodor's Finest at some point, which I'd be enthralled to see. But for now, this is all I've got to say about our favorite Silver Streamliner Spencer. I hope you all enjoyed the video, folks, and that you had just as much fun going on this journey with Spencer as I did. This was easily the most in-depth Sodor study I've done yet, and while it was a very enjoyable project, it was also quite a challenge. And while I'm never going to be one to stray away from challenging videos, I will say that most Sodor study videos will probably continue to stay under the 20 to 30 minute mark for a while, especially when they're about side characters. But don't worry, as I still have plans to do even more in-depth, lengthy analyses of every member of the major cast someday. So stay tuned, and I will see you all in the next one. Bye!